Well, good evening. This is quite a day for us in America. Everything you've talked about today has sort of come through on the national stage all in one day. I'm kind of fortunate to be here on the day where we're withdrawing from the Paris Accord and Generation X is freaking out and millennials passed out a month ago over the president. So all your intergenerational dialogue and the consternation around energy and construction and kind of where we go as a country, it really is kind of entertaining in some ways, but it's also really powerful. It really does have an enormous consequence for the way we think about education, the way we think about our economy, our workforce development system, and the partnerships that we create with the public and private sector. The work that you've all been doing here in these two areas has been pretty remarkable around the state. And I think regardless what happens nationally, we have an opportunity to continue to lead in Washington State, and quite frankly, from right here in Centralia, Washington, in Lewis County. And that's really one of the very exciting things about this system. Many of you are very close to this program, but all across the state, there are these pockets of excellence, these centers of excellence, leading on behalf of the whole state in different areas of our private economy. And it's very, very important that we keep these viable. I also feel very fortunate to be here because this is, a place that I care deeply about as a 14-year veteran of the community and technical college system at the state office. You know, I had a little hand in a few $1 billion that kept flowing to our colleges, sometimes in really easy ways and often in really difficult ways, to make sure that there was equity around the state in terms of capital. You can't just have the money flow to the places growing the most, because often they have the resources to do some of it on their own. And it's communities like Centralia who have the ability to transform their campus and really be the centerpiece of their community, because the state has an approach that is about equity. And I'm really, really proud to have been a part of that. And for those of you who had a role in it, I saw Steve here earlier. He's the master builder of this campus, and I'm very honored to tell you all about his work. So I wanted to share with you this evening, hopefully something that means a lot to you. And that is the idea that just as we've revolutionized energy, and just as we've brought innovation to construction trades, and incidentally, my family's been building for 40 years, and that's how I put myself through high school and college, was building homes on the residential side. But just as that transformation's been happening, and you've all played a part in that, I would argue that there's a workforce development need that's well behind that curve. Well behind innovation is the idea that our students are wanting something very different than the system produces for them today. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because I think at the end of the day, everything we do to get the industry ready for change and everything we do to get the regulatory environment ready for change kind of falls flat if you turn around and there's not a next generation of workers ready to be a part of the industry, whatever that industry might be. And I fear we run into that reality today. So today you've got what I'll argue is a one-size-fits-all K-12 system. And that's a little harsh, but not too harsh. It essentially tells somebody at the age of 5, regardless of whether you're ready or not, 13 years from now, you're going to walk across the stage at the exact same time with all the same skill set as everyone who was joining you at that period of time. And they take this journey together, and lo and behold, humanity actually dominates that reality. And some students move faster than others, and some have interests that are different than others, and some want to emphasize the arts, and some want to emphasize the sciences. But the system is increasingly a one-size-fits-all, where the presumption is you will all head to a university, and we will prepare you as if you were doing that with our rigorous 24 credits and our high-stakes exit exams and everything else. And if you somehow fall off the rails, well, then we'll catch you and give you an alternative. Now, here's the sad part. Park that conversation about the K-12 world and just park that for a minute. The reality is our economy sits right where it has for about 100 years with what is called the 1-2-7 concept. 1 executive, 2 managers, 7 people who actually produce. Sorry, executives, I didn't mean to say that too loudly for you. I'm one of them. 7 production workers for 2 managers and 1 executive. And that ratio hasn't changed. Innovations come along. Technologies come along. We've flattened our world in many ways. We think globally in different ways. So much of the dynamic of an economy and a labor force has changed, but that fundamental structure really hasn't. But we got ourselves convinced about 30 years ago that America didn't have to produce a whole lot anymore. We'd simply create a whole nation of ones, maybe twos. And it turns out you might get your car fabricated or constructed in Japan, but when you need to repair that thing, that's an American job. You might get some product from overseas to construct your home or your commercial building, but when it needs installation, when it needs repair, when it needs renovation, that's right here in America. You might grab a turbine from Germany, but when it comes to repairing it and fixing it, putting it in place, that's an American job. We somehow got ourselves convinced that we could be a thought leader in the world without a producer. And I would argue that we radically shifted our education system to do that. We tore down career and tech ed programs across this state and across this nation in our high schools. We had ourselves convinced that that would be a narrow little niche for students, and they'd pick that up at a technical college or a community college, or maybe on the job or through military service and some apprenticeship. We got ourselves convinced that an entire generation of Americans could simply focus on a 4-year baccalaureate academic track and we'd be all right. And lo and behold, very little has changed in the labor market. Certainly higher skills at every level, but still to this day, we need about 70% of our Washington workers to have more than a high school diploma, less than a bachelor's degree. We need them skilled. We need them energy recognized through certifications. But we only need about a third of our workforce to actually have a baccalaureate degree or higher. So let's connect these two worlds. On one hand, the economy is demanding a labor force that the education system doesn't seemingly want to produce in the way we used to. So I've put forward a pretty ambitious idea that we should transform the education system. It'd be nice to say, let's just transform the economy and become, the Switzerland of the planet, where we all make more than Lake Wobegon's average wage and, live above our means, every one of us. The truth is, we have to think about our education system differently. So I've put forward the idea that it all starts in foundational places, like 3- and 4-year-olds getting truly kindergarten ready. As important is the K-8 system that begins to expand the school day and potentially expand the year. We have to start competing in a workforce development system, not thinking about that student as a workforce development participant when they're 18 or 20 or 30, but honestly when they're 5. And that doesn't mean that the adults in the system tell them what to do. We're not tracking students. We're saying we have high expectations of all kids, and we didn't always do that. But with high expectations comes an expectation that those students are going to find their passion in something. The rest of the world we're competing with puts about 1,200 instructional hours into their students every year. We put 1,000. We're 20% behind the rest of the industrialized world in terms of how they dedicate their investment. The rest of the country, not just the world, but the rest of the United States on average, puts about 3.6% of its GDP back into their public K-12 schools. We put 3% in this state. And you say, well, that's not bad. We're only 0.6% behind. That's $4 billion a fiscal year in this state alone, by the way. That's $4 billion. The solution that the legislature will eventually get to in 8 years when they're all still up there, that solution will be about $2 billion at most. And it's a big step for them. And if you know legislators, and most of you do, they really have tried to work very hard on this. And it's difficult because I think they all care deeply about kids, but they come at it a little differently. So no real criticism of that process. It's difficult. But it'll be about half a loaf is what I'll argue. It'll get us the basics. It'll satisfy a court or get very close to it. But you will not fundamentally transform the education system by simply paying the obligations that you should have paid a decade ago. That'll get us back to break even. So we're talking about 0.6% of GDP coming back into our public education system, transforming the way we do K-8 to try to inject a very different approach to learning. Kids don't just learn for 6.5 hours a day, it turns out. The 17.5 hours they're at home, before school, after school, with family, those are far more impactful. In fact, the research is pretty clear. About 3/4 of a student's achievement influence is a function of things that happen outside the school. And 1/4 of what happens in the school, almost all that's dominated by their classroom teacher. So I don't mean to embarrass any principals or vice principals or school board members here, but statistically speaking, you don't move the world very much. Former teacher, former school board member. So I took both sides of that conversation. So we got to do things differently. But what I'm most excited about is the transformation of the high school system. Beginning with high school and beyond plans that are very purposeful and very tied to every individual beginning in middle school. Getting our students to think about career exploration much earlier gets them excited about the course pathways they need to succeed. Otherwise, you sort of have those middle schoolers on autopilot. Their hormones begin to just short-circuit their brains for about 2 years. I have a 13-year-old in 7th grade. I'm living this right now. We're waiting for him to remember who his parents are. We think it's a year or two away. It's okay. But we can do better than that. We don't have to change the dynamic of human development to get middle school students to think about stuff that they're excited about. But we've rarely asked them. We've said, here's 2 more extended years to your elementary life, and instead of having a homeroom and a single place to go, we're going to march you around to 6 or 7 periods. You have 4 minutes to get to each place. You have an 18-minute lunch. Good luck finding social time at the most social time of your lives. And it turns out, based on the research, they already start checking out in large numbers then. They're still with us, because dropping out as a 13-year-old is an awkward thing, even in America. But mentally, they begin the process of checking out of academics, checking out of careers. They begin the process of disengagement. They begin to tell themselves, this is not the place for me, because you've determined my math sequence, and it's very academic. And you've created my English language arts sequence, and it's very academic. And so for the student who says, I just want to build, I want to construct, I want to fabricate, I want to weld, I want to be a nursing assistant or a vet tech, I want to add real value in places that matter to my heart, that is a very difficult contemplation for a young person. So here's what we're suggesting. Build a high school and beyond plan beginning in middle school with career exploration. Get students thinking about their future much earlier. Make it as individualized for each kid as we do today for students on an IEP in special education. A real individualized plan. Scary concept. That means investing more in counselors and career-connected learning. It means asking the system to do more to work with students about the student interest than the teacher who has content knowledge to hand out to 30 students every hour. That's a very scary world for a lot of teachers. They say, I came to this profession because I have more knowledge, they have less knowledge, and at the end of the year, they have a little more, and I'm a little crazier. This is the world that we've done for a long time, but it's a different world now. This phone that you're all carrying is the most ubiquitous knowledge transmission device in the history of mankind. Knowledge is not the hard thing to find. Facts are not the hard thing to find. Information is the easy thing. Getting students to think critically about whether it's good information, what perspective it brings, how reliable is it. That critical thinking, that's the next frontier of education, particularly in late elementary and middle school. Because if they can think critically, then we got them. Then no matter what they pick, we know they are actually finally proficient. They're ready to go do big things. So the high school transformation looks like this. Instead of a 24-credit diploma, 6 periods a day for 4 years where you essentially need to be perfect, let's build a 12+12 system. A 9th and 10th grade year that finishes out high school proficiency, the way Switzerland does, Finland does, South Korea does, Germany does, Japan does. Most of the world does this. By 14, 15, or 16, they expect students to be essentially high school proficient, the basics. And they use the junior and senior year equivalents in their countries to let them finally explore careers and pathways that make sense to them. In Switzerland, your 15-year-old is working 10 or 15 hours a week in industry, getting high school credit while they're working and earning a little bit of money. That's part of their curriculum. They expect everyone to work a little bit and to get those real-world skills. This is our future. If we expect every industry in this country to continue to evolve and adapt for survival, we have to expect education to adapt for survival. Not as a way to vilify the system that is today, it's a system that's responded the way the fund sources have provided. Put 30 bodies in a classroom, have a knowledge provider in front of them, spew out knowledge for an hour a day for 180 days, 1,000 hours a year. When you're done, the student knows a lot more, test them, get them out, next class. That's a very different system than what the world expects of us. They expect critical thinking, but career exploration early. Our kids should be so excited that they can not only go to a skills center or go into a technical college or a community college when they're 18 or 19, they should be excited to do it at 15 and 16. And we've proven it already for 2.5 decades because Running Start students had a very simple pathway here. We said if you're academic, 23 of your 24 high school credits, boy, do we have offerings for you. Running Start, college in the high school, AP, IB, you name it, we got it for you. You can save tens of thousands of dollars in this world today if you're one of those 30% of students who are headed to a baccalaureate pathway, or the 50% of students who are going to baccalaureate or an associate degree. But if you're part of the 20% who drop out, or the 30% of high school graduates who never step on a college campus, the state of Washington spends $1.5 billion a year on those 50% of kids, and we don't really give them the pathway choice. So imagine the day when that 14-year-old can do another career exploration. By the end of their sophomore year, they say, I know what I want to do. I want to work in the energy industry, and I want to work maintenance. And this country says, great, you didn't settle for something, you chose something we desperately need. And that student goes to work for 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week. Maybe it's a pre-apprenticeship program. Maybe it's very entry-level stuff. But they're working and getting some credit while they're going to school, and they're connecting their learning. We don't put every single kid through Algebra 2 pre-calculus because they're all headed to the UW. We say your third credit of math is an applied math course in the industry area that you are passionate about. So let's put you in a math class that focuses on design or application. I want my construction teams to understand geometry really well. I'd rather have my home builder take 3 geometry classes than a single class where they're factoring quadratic equations at this point, okay? I want my welder to know a lot more chemistry than I do biology at this point in time. But I don't want to vilify any of those fields. They're all for somebody. But this idea that every kid has to be on the same path is not working. We're losing half of them along the way. So this is something I'm challenging you to think about. I'm running around the state challenging everyone to think about. It's going to be really hard. You're talking about taking a system of 1.1 million students and the 4 or 5 million adults in their lives and saying, we're going to do for the next million kids what we didn't do for the 5 million who are here today. We're going to transform the system into something that the rest of the world would recognize and put our kids on a competitive footing. Again, not because I want to vilify the liberal arts. That was my undergraduate pathway. I loved it. I was a social studies major. We need lots of social studies majors. Look at our election system. We need lots of social studies majors, okay? Yeah. But for my older brother, for example, he knew he was going to build his life. He worked with my father. He was an excellent builder by the time he was a teen, but his whole high school experience was pushing him to an academic pathway, and he quite frankly would have just died if he could not have applied that in some way with his hands. So don't let the world tell you that we're just a knowledge economy, that we no longer need to produce. Don't let the world tell you that technical education and community colleges are not our future, because quite frankly, this is where 70% of all of our students need to land at some point in time. And don't believe for a second that we're a state that cannot transform our existing economy to meet this need, or the $15 billion per year that we spend in this state in public education. We don't have to be a high-tax state to do this. I think we're going to need some additional investment. I'd like to see us look average. Instead of 3% of GDP reinvested, let's get to that 3.6% over the next 6 years. But then let's transform the money we spend in the secondary system. It's $3 billion a year, which is about $1.5 billion on the 50% of kids who never touch a college campus, but who need an economic opportunity. It'll be hard. You're going to pay a little more taxes. Say it with me, taxes are necessary. See, so half the room's like, no, I'm not doing that. I want more for less. Well, welcome to America, damn it. We got to end that attitude. You want more, you pay more. You want less, that's okay, pay less. There's a store who made an entire business model about that. Some of you are wearing their shoes and you're like, oh, I know. My back hurts every day. Pay less, get less. So I am perfectly willing to entertain questions if you have them. I happen to be 19 years old, so I know something about intergenerational issues as well, if you want to talk about those. I'm the whiny Gen X generation, by the way. All we do is talk about you boomers with all your success, and millennials with all their whining, who are living in your basements playing video games because they think that's a lifestyle. And there's 70 million of you boomers, and there's about 75 million millennials, but there's only about 40 million Gen Xers. There's only 40 million of us Reagan babies running around out there, and we're waiting for many of you to retire soon. And we know why you didn't through, say, 10 or 11, but your equity markets have recovered. You're fine. Move along now. So my favorite part is like there's two boomers like, I know, but I do it for the health care. That is a reality. Part of what we have to do as a family here is make sure that as we break down the policy arena for the industry to be successful, and some regulatory stuff for sure, we got to dial up the voice of the labor market. There's this presumption that if you build it, they will come, and it's just not true. We cannot fill STEM jobs despite the ungodly amount of STEM opportunity that's flourishing all over the state. You have young people who say, I just don't get it yet. I don't want to be a programmer. I don't want to be a coder. I don't want to work in that stuff. I think a lot of them will come that way if they connect with it. But it's a weird thing, this millennial generation. They're not moved by the idea of a big salary, for example. So can you flex up life for them? Can you allow them to jump from job to job? They can't imagine living in the old IBM triangle where they're going to spend 30 years in a single career, let alone a single organization. So I think you all have to keep dialing up the labor market conversation, both with policymakers, within your organizations, and you got to figure out ways to reach to younger people. You will get asked in the next year and a half by this large launch that the governor announced yesterday to have industries really stepping up to take high school age students and put them essentially in pre-apprenticeship programs, some of them very non-traditional. So well beyond the trades, for sure. We kind of want to look like Switzerland. We want every industry to know what they would offer a young person to get them in the door, get them a first job, minimum wage, but the skills they might need to simultaneously grow in the job and get some credit for it. That's the system we're launching right now. So get really vocal about the labor market you need and figure out ways to engage young people. As we were failing to fund education at the basic level while we simultaneously convinced ourselves for 30 years that everyone was going to be in the knowledge economy, we didn't need to be producers, we literally had high schools defining their future by academics. Put students 30 to a pile in a math class, don't have two 15-person math classes in applied math or construction trades. We quite literally made it impossible for each home high school to really mount those career and tech ed programs. The shop programs, as we all knew them, the vocational programs. Big comprehensive high schools with scale can still do it. Lots of the middle and small size high schools for 30 years said, we cannot make this work. We literally don't have the funding model for the student-faculty ratio that makes a shop a safe place. But the need was still there. So yes, the state regionalized. We went to a skills center model, and you nailed it exactly. We made this presumption that the geographic model would allow a student to stay in their home high school half the time, get their academic stuff done, go to a skills center half the time to get their technical work done. And it turns out Newmarket's a perfect example. It sits in Tumwater. It's serving tons of Southwest Washington. You have students who give up 2 hours a day to try to get there and back. So that student can get their 3 credits at the skills center, but they're getting 1 credit back at their home high school. And if they're already credit deficient, that becomes an almost impossible task. So we have proposed the idea, starting with a pilot basis. Calm yourself down if you're a local superintendent right now. Just take a deep breath. That we bring the academics to the skills center, and we allow students to go full-time in regional skills centers to get technical high school diplomas. That's where the future is. If you are putting kids first and not thinking about your cash flow, this makes perfect sense. If you are a school district really on the struggle right now, particularly if you're worried that the legislature is not going to fully fund basic ed and they're going to simultaneously take away your levy, you're pretty freaked out right now. When 10 students walk away, $80,000 just walked away. So it's a real worry. It is a sincere worry. which is why you cannot underestimate the power of solving this McCleary case and getting basic ed funded. You will see districts liberate themselves and say, now that I have the ability to meet all my cash flow needs and my labor costs, what's best for kids? And when they can say that, they're going to do exactly what you just described. They're going to say, what is the best place for a kid? With us, at a skill center full-time, running START if necessary, college in the high school, online. When we make it about the student pathway, then we're going to change this dynamic, and we're not going to graduate 79% of kids, but we're going to move to that 90, that intermediate mark and higher. But it's all about getting basic ed funded. We are pretty much putting teachers through the same programs that I did 25 years ago. They're getting smarter about putting a racial and equity lens on the world. They're seeing the world differently in terms of how students see them, which is a powerful first step. But they're mostly folks who go through traditional programs, teacher prep programs, who themselves were benefactors of traditional liberal arts baccalaureate degree programs, as are their counselors. So we do have a big cultural shift to make, and part of that is while we simultaneously change policy and develop the pathways for students, we have to change the culture of embracing all kids. I hate to be this critical, but it's still, when you walk in a high school today, it still feels very much like somebody had to settle for something if they are not baccalaureate bound. And that begins with the culture of faculty honoring all students. And so it's a classic. You go to a high school graduation, they have everyone stand up who's going to WSU, woo, UW, woo, community college, woo. And then they sort of get down to the end and they're like, who's going to a police academy, woo. And like 40% of kids never stand up because their goal is to actually go to work tomorrow. And half of them are already working as high school students, but because they got to pay their way through life partly. So we got to change the culture of that. We got to recruit very differently for education. And the hardest thing is we've got to embrace industry. This is you failing baby boomers, pay attention. And we got to figure out pathways to get them in classrooms at this point in time. And we do have alternative certification routes. We do bring folks in from industry, but it's really, really tough. And actually the data is really, really clear. They definitely struggle more with the classroom management issues and some of the social and emotional issues. They're very good at content. So meaningful pathways for professionals to come back into the workforce and diversify that workforce. That doesn't compromise a lot of what we've now learned, which is that those 17 hours of a kid's life are as impactful or more than the 7 we have them. So big complications about the labor market that we need in order to build the better labor market. We've got some universities and colleges doing a really good job of this, including some folks at the 2-year level, but I'd say it's baby steps right now. So the federal-state interaction is pretty interesting. We're very much a state system, and we are really a state-driven nation. It is truly in our Constitution. There is no recognition of education at the federal level. For appropriate reasons, we've built up some capacity at the federal level because you had states for decades and decades not enforcing civil rights laws. And basic education is this powerful civil rights engagement activity. So there is a role for the feds to enforce equity. There is not a place, in my opinion, for the feds to enforce curriculum, textbook adoptions, teacher development, testing systems. I mean, you name all the garbage that Democrats and Republicans have gotten into for the last 30 or 40 years, and you realize why somebody can come along like President Trump and say, we're going to wipe all that out. It's very appealing, and I agree with him on a lot of that stuff at the federal level. The challenge is that he put in place a secretary who is deeply passionate about kids, and I got to meet her a month and a half ago or so, who knows nothing about public education. And I don't say that in a mean way. I literally mean if you spent your entire life on one endeavor, it would be hard for you to suddenly manage another endeavor. The moral obligation that comes with taking a kindergarten class of 17 and having some kids who are reading at the 3-year-old level and some who are reading at the 7 or 8-year-old level, that is a stunningly powerful moment in the life of a kindergarten teacher to figure out how to bring all those kids along in standard. That is a world that Betsy DeVos does not understand. She doesn't understand the democratization that happens in education, public education. So this idea that the private marketplace should dominate, she's sincere about that, and she's passionate about that, and I respect where she is individually. I don't actually think you get a better result. The research is really clear that all of this choice stuff is choice. You definitely empower parents. The academic outcomes are absolutely no better, and in some cases worse, because in the case of vouchers, you absolutely reintroduce segregation. So I'm worried to the extent only that she won't tell Washington State what to do, but they're going to withhold some money, and you're a donor state, in case you didn't know that. You are in the top 15 of per capita tax states at the federal level. You give a lot more to the feds than this state gets back per capita. So you're a donor state who's about ready to lose formula dollars in your K-12 system under the DeVos plan, so that money can migrate to the South in voucher programs, where they are massive beneficiary states. They get back lots more than they pay into it, and we're about ready to give them more under the voucher scheme. So that's my worry, is that we're going to lose some resource. I really don't think we have to worry about them bringing some draconian curriculum or approach. They're actually very sincere about not doing that. They say local control, state control, we're not into that. So it's very beneficial in that regard. But we're going to watch our wallets for a while, because we're going to lose some formula money. And most of that money targets low-income students and English language learners and special education. So we're talking about losing money on 3 populations that we are laser focused on. So I want to thank you. It's a great, great room. You folks have a tremendous, tremendous impact statewide here. I encourage you to keep this going. There's going to be some leadership change, and congrats on your retirement. But this is where it's at. And it's going to take industry to continue to pound the table to say we expect something different from education. We expect it to look a lot more like the labor force we need, and not the one that we've tried to mold with the false belief of baccalaureates for all. And it's going to take a little sacrifice from all of us. We don't get out of this thing by demanding more and paying less. It's probably the biggest false narrative of the nation for 30 or 40 years. So let's expect more of ourselves and our kids by sacrificing a little more to make it happen. So thank you.